Alrighty. Welcome. Hey guys. If you are tuning in on AirMeet or on LinkedIn, welcome to Outbound 2.0. I am not Jason. He is traveling today. It's also his birthday. So happy birthday to Jason, wherever he is, not at work right now. Hope he's having an awesome time. But super excited to be here with you guys today. So for anyone who's watching, who may not have seen me on some of our other live streams before, my name is Adriana. I'm the community manager here at RevGenius. If you're watching maybe on LinkedIn and you haven't really heard of RevGenius, you're not totally sure who we are, what we do. We're basically a community of tech professionals in sales, marketing, revenue operations, and success on Slack, and we throw a bunch of free events. So if you want to learn more, go to revgenius.com. So super excited for today's episode. We have Andy and Jason from Live Data Technologies here today. I will let you guys take a second, introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Sure. Go for it. All right. Welcome. Thanks for having us, Adriana. My name's Andy McBride. I'm head of revenue here at Live Data. We're based out in Santa Barbara, California. We've been facing a little bit of difficulties with the weather and stuff, so we had to come across the street and hopefully get some better internet connection today. So apologies if the microphone and the audio video starts to break up a little bit here. I've been with the company for about a year now. Previous to that, I was at another local data company here called HG Insights, formerly HG Data. So I've been in the sort of MarTech space for a number of years. And Jason?
Yeah, I'm the director of growth at Live Data, joined early December to sort of start heading up the marketing and sort of demand gen side of things for us. Come from a professional cycling background, not anything to do with data, not a career data junkie yet, getting there. But excited to be here and starting to get things rolling.
Awesome. So we have a lot to cover today. So I know that we have a few topics that we want to touch on. If you are actually reaching your prospects at the right time on the right platform, you had also mentioned some kind of formula to write an outbound email so good that it gets thank you notes. So for sure, curious about that. And then I also heard a little something about Abraham Lincoln's golden rule of outbound. So I guess let's start there, because from what I know, Abraham Lincoln was not really like sending out outbound emails in his day. So I'm very curious. What is this golden rule? I must know.
Right. Yeah. Well, I could take that, and because they're both tied together in the sense that the quote is, and I believe it was Abraham Lincoln. I wanted to just validate that.
No, we validated it.
Okay. All right. So his quote, which much more of the time, if I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 4 sharpening my axe. And that's ultimately sort of our strategy when it comes to our outbound prospecting. And so what we do when we do our outbound prospecting and we're trying to reach our targets and engage our buyers, we do a lot of work. It's not a numbers game for us. We know that can work in certain scenarios in different markets. But for us, we spend a decent amount of time understanding our buyer, who they are, what they probably care about, and then showing some type of value in our initial outreach. So instead of trying to make 100 swings a day, like as a cold calls, if you will, we'd rather spend the first 4 or 5 hours building a bunch of insights on that particular prospect or account, and then reaching out with something that's of interest, something that they're going to get value on. And the feedback that we receive from those individuals, is very encouraging. We like, I think in your things that we get thank you notes, and we do. We get people are congratulate us all the time on a weekly basis of saying, I get these, and I do too, as head of revenue, as you can imagine. I get a bunch of emails, prospecting emails, and they're very generic. It's, hey, Andy, I love what you're doing there at Live Data, and then they go into the pitch. No value. There's really nothing else that I can say that, and that immediately goes into unsubscribe or delete. So the approach that we take is really trying to say, and we can talk a little bit about obviously what live data does, but in reality, it's probably relevant for whatever it is that you're trying to engage your customers, your prospects with, is show them something that would be of interest to them, right? Put yourself in your buyer's shoes. And obviously they're facing a lot of challenges, and the macro climate today too. Budgets are getting cut. So what would be interesting for them? And the term, it's either I've heard two versions of this. It's either eat your own dog food or drink your own champagne. So I prefer the drinking your own champagne analogy. But we obviously use part of our data and do a little bit of work to be able to showcase what it could do for that particular individual. So there is some customization that needs to happen on that. There's a ton of tools out there that can help with the automation, and certainly we leverage some of those. But at the end of the day, it's really trying to provide some value that engages your prospect and gives them a reason to reach back out and at least get a conversation going. Does that sound about right, Jason?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is for us. We'd rather bet on one really good first touch, one really good first message, than saying that it's going to be the ninth message or the ninth email in the campaign or the drip sequence or whatever it may be that eventually breaks through, right? We'd rather put all our cards on the table, make it that value super easy to see, super clearly demonstrated from the word go, and that takes more time, more effort to get it right the first time than to say, okay, we're going to just do it by numbers. We're going to reach out to people as many times as possible. It's sort of how can we get away from that? Or even if we're going to do that, how can we make the first touch immediately valuable to the prospect or the lead?
So I'm really curious to hear your take on this, because there has been a post circulating on LinkedIn. I'm sure you guys have seen it, but I think it was posted maybe Friday or Monday, so pretty recently. But it's been making the rounds. Kyle Coleman has commented on it. So it was actually my previous boss, Ronan Passar, had posted on LinkedIn about how companies shouldn't be doing research before they start calling, because that does affect their volume. But you guys, I think Kyle had also kind of said the same thing, which is that in all respect, we disagree, because it's we need to be able to provide value. Yes, that does affect how we're able to scale, but talk to me about this. Why is there so much disagreement regarding this? And how can teams know what direction to take with their outbound?
Sure. I think, listen, both approaches are, what's the end result here? Going back to Abe's quote, we want to chop down a tree. Now, you can spend 6 hours swinging that axe as hard as you can and get really tired, but at the end result, the tree comes down, right? Or you can take the approach that we take and you spend a little bit more time on this type of things, reach out to less people, but the end result is you close a deal. The tree, So that's, I'm not saying that you can't do that. And I can see where if you have somebody just said quality over quantity. I agree 100%.
And I'd take it one step further and say that, I think one of the things that matters here is what you're selling, what the price point is, right? How big that tree is that you're swinging at. If you are if you're selling something that's a $99 product or a $99 service, right? That's a different size tree. That's an easier tree to chop down than a $25,000 contract or a $50,000 contract. That's a bigger tree, right? I'd rather, if I can swing the axe 100 times at 100 small trees, that's maybe not so hard. If I have to swing the axe 100 times at a really big tree, I'd rather figure out how to have a much sharper axe from the get-go and make it, this quality, not quantity sort of thing.
The other thing that I think that it also helps with, and we're a relatively small startup. We've got a couple AEs. Just smiling and dialing, again, it works for certain markets. But the thing that happens and has been happening at Live Data with our reps is that you start to understand that market, and you start to be able to actually provide value versus just getting on a call, setting that meeting, and then handing it off to somebody else and have them start to dig in and then understand that. I think when you're talking about that first touch, that first outreach, if they engage, Well, you're obviously, you've done the research. You can speak intelligently about some of their problems and probably who their competitors are, or whatever that space you may be doing, and trying to articulate your value prop, versus just trying to get it to the next stage of the deal by handing it off to somebody else. So I think from a growth perspective, and being able to write, an enterprise level business email and articulate value, that there's also something to be said about that versus just trying to make your 100 calls a day and then setting an appointment.
And I think there's, right, going back to what you started this with, which is, there are LinkedIn posts circulating a lot right now about, different aspects of sales and how to optimize, sort of the entire cycle. Is, it really, you get this difference between what the vanity metric is for,
True.
the SDR, the BDR, right, handing it off. All they really care about is handing it off to the AE team, and then the AE team hands it off to the sales leader and whatever it is to eventually get it closed. And the metric becomes just, what step in the process am I responsible for, as opposed to how do I make this whole process as efficient as possible for everyone, right? How do we really get that alignment and get away from some of the, maybe not get away from, but focus on the right metrics, as opposed that really close deals in the long run, as opposed to making it just the numbers game of, hey, 100 turns into, at the SDR level, turns into 10 at the AE level, turns into 2 at the sales leader level. I'd rather get 10 people that turns into 5 really well researched, really high intent, prospects, down the line.
Yeah. Awesome. So we have some cool questions in the chat, so I do want to make sure that we answer these. So Santiago asked, how do we find a balance between quality and quantity?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think it really depends on the product or service that you're selling, and if what your ultimate, your price point is. Because yeah, if you're selling a $99 a month solution, it's really hard to do a ton of work and try to engage that. But if there's a land and expand opportunity, you're running a PLG motion. There's a lot of things out there, and I think this also kind of ties into some of the other questions that we see here in terms of, the other question was, how do you find your first 10 customers of a B2B SaaS product? There are so many data vendors, products. When you think about like Technographics, which is what HG was, and I spent the last 6 years on, which is what the products that customers use. There's firmographics, demographics, intent data. Then you start, lumping in all of these AI tools that are now, coming on the market, on top of all the gongs and the outreachers. There's so many different tools that are at your disposal. It is hard to try to find the balance, but leveraging all those tools, I think it really comes back to try to find, well, where is your buyer? So I've been in B2B tech sales for, 16, 17 years now. And I worked for a company that we sold into, it was a security product that we sold into the education space. And we sold through value-added resellers. Not too many SaaS companies really leverage the resell model as much anymore. It's more about ecosystems. But back then, the easiest way, and I was just into sales. They gave me 17 states, of which were basically nobody wanted to go and visit. And so I would travel a ton, and how could I possibly cover 17 states? And so we were selling to tech directors of school districts. Well, who are they buying from?
Yeah.
We were all buying from local resellers. Well, how can I engage those resellers? I would go into some of these, my initial conversations with these resellers. They were getting pitched 100 products a week. Why was ours different? So trying to identify how they buy and who they buy from, I think was one of the earliest lessons that I learned in sales. And so what I started to do was go to, I think it was HP and Dell. I pretended as if I was a tech director of a school district, and I went on HP's website and Dell's website, and you would select, oh, I'm a school. And then they would say, oh, here's all the people in your state that are certified education resellers for Dell or HP. And lo and behold, those were great people for me to reach out. And I sure did, and signed up all of those folks and said, we got a very, interesting, specific educational tool. We've got a couple of customers that are in your area. We're looking to onboard partners to help us, service those customers. And you bet I got a response every single one, and then leverage that for that buyer. So again, everything's going to be different. There isn't, I think, a silver bullet here to say, well, this is the right way of doing, one or the other. Especially in B2B SaaS now, a lot of that comes direct. You've seen a lot of companies, have to build massive sales teams in order to get the reach. What's your thoughts on? Would you agree?
Yeah, I think I would agree. Right. I think I'll tie in two of the questions that have popped up on the side here. Right. Or I guess another question that popped up on the side into this quantity versus quality conversation, and it's any tips on how to find your first 10 customers of a B2B SaaS product. Right. I'm not necessarily going to say that there's a beautiful recipe to answer that question, but I think doing it and being really diligent about treating it as research, treating it as that the first really super manual processes that you have to go through to get those 10 customers, and doing the getting all of the learnings out of that, so that you can then scale that quality of that outreach of those customers that you've been talking to out into, okay, now we need the quantity. Now we're trying to scale, right? It's the classic startup thing of how you start with something that's unscalable and you figure out how to scale it. And a little bit that cliche, definitely holds true when you're trying to find your first customers of it here.
So I want to answer Jay's question, which is definitely a predicament that I have run into in previous sales development roles, which is, how can we do this if we're in an industry where prospects are not as active on LinkedIn or even invest much into their LinkedIn accounts? Like, where do you go to do that research? What are you looking for? How are you reaching out to them?
Yeah, I think that kind of ties into what I was discussing before around, like, where are your buyers, right? So, oftentimes, going back to the tech directors, LinkedIn really wasn't as prevalent back then. Again, this is going back to 2005, 2007. And so, they didn't have, LinkedIn. So it's really just trying to, understand who your buyers are, where they buy from. And so that's kind of the approach that I would take. If, I'm trying to think of a good example that's not, in B2B sort of tech sales. So if you were,
even just thinking of like the most opposite ends of the spectrum of B2C versus B2B, right? You think about the difference of, people scroll through LinkedIn and go to LinkedIn ads to buy, and if they see a pair of shoes or a new brand of fizzy water, right? Instagram's a great place for people to find those things and to surface those things for those people, because that's where consumers are. That's where they spend their free time. That's where they're, at least at this point, I think they've been trained a little bit to expect ads, to expect being a little bit in the mindset of, hey, I might find something as I'm scrolling through Facebook or YouTube or Instagram that I want to buy, right? I'm primed, I'm ready, I know. Whereas on the B2B side of things, and at least for B2B SaaS, B2B tech products, right? People go to LinkedIn and they know that that's where people go to find this information, right? If I need a new MarTech solution, as right, it's recently started, we're implementing marketing automation, whatever it is, right? I'm going to go to LinkedIn and I'm going to probably just reach out to the people in my network to start and try to figure out, hey, what do you use? And then probably the algorithm in someone's great retargeting is going to figure out that I've been asking these questions and searching these things on the internet and visiting different websites as I get recommendations. And someone's going to surface their product in terms of an ad, or they're going to figure out that I need to be on their, outbound email list or whatever it may be. So a lot of it is figuring out, where that specific buyer is, and, whether that's B2C and you're on social, the more consumer-centric social media channels, whether that's B2B and you're on LinkedIn, or whether there are specific communities because you sell a solution for hospital workers and frontline healthcare workers who probably aren't on LinkedIn as much, right? You figure out where they spend their time. Are there communities? Is there the Rev Genius equivalent for these hospital and healthcare workers? And how can I find them?
I do want to kind of, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you.
Yeah, that's right. Well, one last thing, as I was kind of thinking about what I've done and also other things that I've seen be deployed that's been successful, not necessarily that's me in particular. And I think they're starting to make a comeback. Obviously, we all went through the COVID, and now everybody's kind of getting back out there again. And I think conferences are a great way of getting in front of people. And there's, I'll say that I think that there's nothing better when you can get a prospect face to face and you have that connection, and you start having that conversation and understanding. I think that's a great way. But not just the conferences that you have to go buy a booth and pay 20 grand for the booth and ship all this stuff and do all that. Go as an attendee, learn, network. I know a recruitment agency that specializes in sort of B2B tech salespeople. They were going to the tech conferences because that's where all the salespeople were. Well, if you're looking for talent, where are your salespeople, right? They obviously sell to the HR people, but they were making connections with salespeople at these tech events, which their customers or they're trying to sell are the CIO and the CISOs of the world. So again, you start to think again. I hate the word outside the box, but where are the people that you would want to interact with? Where are they going to be? How can you interact with them versus the standard sort of the LinkedIn and everywhere else that everybody else is trying to get their attention on, right?
Yeah. So okay, conferences, awesome. Love the idea of like getting right in front of people. But let's say the other like 350 days a year, right? If someone I used to prospect property managers, for example, but also like medical staff is another really good example of people who maybe aren't really on LinkedIn, aren't really like involved in the community in the same way as a lot of people who are like in sales and marketing. So when you're talking about like going into communities, are you more so like getting into these communities and creating connections with individual people, answering questions, like more so kind of in the hopes that like someone is interested in the product, or are you kind of joining these communities to understand these people's issues, what's relevant to them, what's top of mind for them, and then you're creating something like email messaging around it? Is it a combination of both? Like, what should people be doing?
Absolutely, it's a combination of both. I mean, my answer was going to be D, all of the above. But yeah, I think a lot of it is figuring out both how you can leverage that community to stay top of mind for individual buyers, but also using it as a research platform for figuring out messaging for email. What are the things that people are talking about? What are the things that people care about? What are the questions that people have that you can turn into email messaging or a blog post or a whatever it may be, where you can sort of proactively get in front of these people in a way that they feel seen, feel heard, feel understood.
Yeah, I think I used, this is going back again, decade plus, but there was a community for IT directors called Spiceworks, and they would air their grievances and the challenges that they were facing. And so just to kind of put yourself in your buyer's shoes, like what are they, is it, budgets are being cut or that was the GFC at the time. Like what things are they facing that they probably won't tell you on a sales call? That's really hard to kind of get at. But in those type of communities, and I'm not saying, by the way, to go in and that's where you go pitch. I'm saying that's where you go to understand more of your buyer, because you'll get 86 out of there pretty quick. And people don't appreciate that. But I think, just trying to, again, I think it'd be like they would appreciate that you're putting the effort in to try to understand like where they are and what challenges they're facing, so that when you do eventually approach them, you can be more prescriptive about what it is that your solution or service can offer.
And I mean, I'll admit that that's how I got into the Rev Genius community, right? We sell live data to go-to-market teams, right? Sales, marketing, customer success, Rev Ops, whatever it may be. And guess what? There are channels on the Rev Genius Slack for each one of those that I can go into on a daily basis and see what people care about, see how people are talking about some of their problems that directly to pertain to what we can solve for them with the technology we have at Live Data, and figuring that out from a messaging standpoint, from a product marketing standpoint of, hey, maybe we want to look at integrating this feature, maybe we want to think about these certain things, or hey, maybe I should write a blog post because everyone's been asking, how do I make sure I'm sending good emails to the right email address. And so a lot of it is using community as a research platform as much as it's a direct sales platform and making connections with individuals that way.
For sure. Okay, so kind of scooting back to value that I know you guys kind of mentioned, but Bethany asks, can you talk more about what value looks like? My team is on board with quality over quantity, but we aren't clear on how to get that wanted thank you response.
It's a great question. Well, the value is ultimately what you're delivering to your client. What is it that what value do they get from that? Is it their time back? Is it, in our case, is it opportunities or leads that should be warm? I mean, it really depends on what that is. So, it's going to be dependent upon, what is your ultimate, value prop of your company? What's your go-to market like messaging in the marketplace, and how could you provide that specific to that individual in an email? So I guess what would be a good example that's not us, so that we're always like using us. Again, I'm trying to use how I would do that. I guess obviously I've used my examples. So in my previous role at HG, we were starting to get into the capital market space. So we were selling into hedge funds and private equity, venture capital firms. So I would research what portcos or what investments that private equity company has made. And then I would go deep into each of those portcos to understand what insights our data could show that would be interesting for the person that I know is probably, because you go on LinkedIn and see that this person's on the board. Well, they obviously care a lot about that particular company. So when I would be sending my initial emails, it would have something that was very specific to that individual, as well as what our data could help them do by showing. In that case, it was customer growth over time. And that was the value that they would get from the data that we were providing at that time.
So Patrick, I wonder if you guys have some insight for him. He actually asked any ideas for outreach value for web design and SEO retainer clients.
I mean, I think, a little bit, the easiest thing I can think of is send your initial email with an audit. Tell them what you'd fix, tell them what's wrong, tell them what, could be better. Even if it's just, I went in and I looked at, to take the SEO example over the web design example, I went in and looked at I ran an Ahrefs report or a SEMrush report of your company, and I saw that, these backlinks don't track, or you're not maximizing your use cases for these keywords relative to what you do, right? Look, it's still a lot of work for them to go and fix that. You can be the solution, but you're surfacing this, these insights and showing them that you sort of, right? You've already taken the work and you've done the work on the front end to show them that you're thinking about their business specifically. It's not, I went out and, the last company I worked with, I got their domain rating from 13 to 44 in 60 days, right? It's, hey, this is how I would do that for you, right? It's going to be a lot of work to get to it, but this is how I would do it.
And also, and I think, and on that example, because I think that's a good one, I mean, everybody has a website. How do you possibly start to filter down, well, who should be the person that I reach out to that's going to be most interested in the services that I offer? And when I go back to all those different things that are available to us now as sellers, you think about like if I'm in the SEO, I don't know a ton about that space. I know you do, but I would say like, okay, well, like what products do they use? You could use a product like Built With to see like which products they already have in place. Maybe you have some special certifications that come up with that. One of the things that Live Data does, disclaimer, this is not a full-on pitch, but we got to talk a little about it.
We haven't really covered it yet.
I know.
So,
okay, all right, fair enough. All right,
and especially when we get to the latest question here on triggers and data points, it's absolutely going to be a little bit
fair enough.
Biased.
So if somebody, we track his job changes, right? So we track 30,000 job changes, and there's a day. Sorry, 30,000 job changes a day. Thank you. Yeah. And there's a bunch of stats around that somebody who moves into a decision-making role. So if they became who would be the person in charge of SEO?
The director of growth, right?
Okay.
I can tell you that I get probably 4 or 5, cold emails a day about someone who has some solution for our SEO.
And McKinsey, there's a whole bunch of like consultants out there that I think, or maybe at Gartner, but basically they say, in the first 100 days, you spend 70% of that of your new budget. So you're what, 100 right now?
I'm still within the 100-day window for anyone trying to sell me something.
And you are. We just talked about marketing automation.
We're about to sign the deal today on a marketing automation platform. We talked about that a little bit earlier, right? I can see it play out in my own role here.
So to go back to the question about how would you engage SEO? Well, first I would try to get that list down to by using different types of data sets, whether that's technographics or firmographics
or job changes,
or whatever that may be. Then to get to I know that these individuals or these companies are my highest likelihood that they're going to engage with me versus just trying to spray and pray everybody, because that would be a waste of time. If you're doing all this research and time and then you send it out and it doesn't reach a certain set of criteria within your ICP. So I think
even again, to sort of keep a plug on the job change side of things, right? Thinking about the web design, right? The company I was at previously was an agency that focused on helping startups launch their content marketing function. The first thing I did when I started there was redesign our website, right? We're currently going through the process of refreshing the Live Data website, right? Within my first 100 days, right? I can tell you pretty definitively that, at least in my experience as a head of growth and now a director of growth, one of the first things I will look at every time I start a job is to run a full audit of the website, because, if anything you're doing to drive traffic to the website should then, you want to convert that traffic. Your website should be one of your highest conversion assets. And that's generally a low-hanging fruit place to start. And within the first 100 days of being at both these roles, I looked at it, right? So, knowing those things, knowing what, again, some of the triggers are, or data points are for your specific, whatever it is that you're selling, that make it so that someone is more likely to be interested. They're higher intent for whatever reason, right? We talk a lot about how many data sets there are, how many data vendors there are, how many ways there are to sort of build your own intent models, or leverage someone else's intent model that they built to really understand when someone is primed and ready to receive that value.
And my take is in all of that, and all these tools that ultimately give you back time, all these sequencing tools, these outreach tools, that gives you back time. My belief is to then provide more value in that outreach, not necessarily just for outreach, just sending more emails. Hey, Andy, I love what you're doing at Live Data. Insert, calendar, schedule time with me, right? And now with ChatGPT and everything else is coming out, I think that just gives a seller more opportunity for them to spend time in making their initial outreach, which is what we're talking about today, right? More targeted to that individual.
So I think that kind of brings us to the next thing. Well, one, Willie said, let's set up a demo. So he seems pretty high intent. Maybe you guys should add him to one of your sequences. Okay, so Mike asked, how long should an email be to a C level? Do you believe in admiration fluff at the beginning of the email, or just mention something quickly and get to the point? Thoughts on this?
What do you, my first question is, what do you know about this C-suite executive, right? Do you know that they're CEO at company XYZ, or do you actually have something meaningful to say? Are you just going to add a bunch of fluff that ChatGPT would write for you a little bit? Or, what, again, is what you know about this person going to lead to a more specific value proposition for that person, or a more specific way to demonstrate your value for that person? If not, keep it short, keep it sweet. Hope for the best, get to the value as quickly as possible. If you can do it in a way where certain things about that person, right? Maybe they just got promoted to the C-suite, or maybe they were at a company that you sold to previously, or whatever it may be, right? You can then think about, okay, I can add those layers of nuance, those layers of detail. But otherwise, I would a little bit say, just get to the value as quickly as possible, because you only have so many words before someone either the little bit of text underneath the subject line cuts off and someone says, screw it, I'm just going to delete it anyways. Or, you lose interest.
I try and keep it to 3 sentences and under, which is really hard to do, right? Underneath provide the actual value that I'm trying to show within, whether that's in the form of like even a graph or like a list or something that may happen, but it's really hard to do. Anybody can sit and give an hour-long demo about, oh, and if I click on this feature, but I think the book was Pitch Anything. And I love this kind of quote that the most scientific discovery of the 21st century was Watson and Crick, the double helix, the DNA. And their report read out loud is under 3 minutes. And I can't remember who the author was, but like if it takes you longer to talk about whatever your product demo, your product in 3 minutes, pretty sure it's not as complicated as the discovery of DNA. So, get to, but it's way harder to do that than try and just, fill an hour of, oh, okay. And then if I click on this report here, I'll show, and that's always kind of been in the back of my mind when doing, whether that's email or on a call with a client, is to really sort of just get to the point and provide as much value in the shortest time space as possible.
Awesome. So I think this does kind of tie into our last question, but Chelsea asked, what is the best way to get the attention of a founder? Is it presenting the solution to a problem many of them face, ego stroking, perhaps a combination?
It's funny because that's the second time the other person talked about the admiration fluff. I don't know if I'm C-suite, but I've never gotten any admiration or fluff. So
no, neither have I. And I honestly try it. Yeah, tell me I look good today. Maybe I'll buy what you're selling.
Just send me affirmations that get rid of my imposter syndrome. Thank you. I would respond to that.
Yeah, a little bit. I think my initial response to that is probably it depends. Right, it depends on your existing relationship with them. It depends on how much you actually know about them, or whether it is just words to say nice words. In a sense, I'd probably especially at the founder level, right? You think about how chaotic startups are, how existential every day seems. Time is valuable, right? Yeah. And I find myself getting far more annoyed trying to read something that's a long email that doesn't get to the point immediately than I do knowing someone's trying to sell me something, understanding what it is that they're trying to sell me, and whether or not being able to evaluate it as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. And I would agree. And also I just add that, going back to there's, you've got Crunchbase. Well, has that founder raised, have they raised a Series A, or are they still in seed? Who do they get that money from? Do you have any connections there? Are there, other things that you could try to engage them? Again, I think, you're trying to present a solution to the problem that many of them face. And they are, they're also herding cats and doing a bunch of other things. And it's tough. I don't know if stroking the ego is the way to go. I think that now that we've had that question twice, at least it hasn't worked for me. Maybe I should try it.
Yeah.
But probably a combination doesn't hurt. Maybe a little congrats on your recent raise or that type of thing. Or maybe they made a key hire. Maybe they hired their first founding engineer. Maybe they hired their first CTO or a salesperson. Or again, all this information is out there, but trying to cut through the noise, show that you did a little bit of work, I think we'll get them to respond. I know that if somebody sends me an email and I just see a little bit of work, I always respond. I may not be in market, but I appreciate the effort. And I will respond and we'll click unsubscribe.
And I'd actually say, to go a little bit to this, right? We raised our Series A at Live Data pretty recently and got, I think everyone in a position to potentially buy something got inundated with a bunch of emails, all that started super similarly. Congrats on your recent raise. Most of those, because again, you see the subject line and you see the first 7 words or whatever it is. Most of the ones that started with congrats on your recent raise, just all right, cool, next. It wasn't, hey, I can do this for you. The vanity, maybe as much as we all wanted to feel seen for having achieved this milestone or this stepping stone in the trajectory of Live Data. Mm-hmm. Great. But I think we all already knew that we raised the money. I think we all already knew that, we were ready to just keep our heads down and start working. right? Again, going back to this, time is valuable. Especially for the founders, right? The company I was at previously, our target was founders, right? We were a content marketing studio aimed at helping startups launch their content function, and so I directly on the founder piece. It's I don't know how many founders I talked to, but that basically said, hey, yeah, like when I know I need something, I need it. Right? If someone gets in front of me and tells me why what they have for me is going to solve that problem I have, done. Easy, quick. I'll evaluate it. I'll take the time. Then I'll make the time. I don't want to waste, even if it is really just 15, 20 seconds reading the first part of the email, right? Attention spans are only so long, right? That's why 12-second YouTube. That's why 12-second videos do better than 22-second videos on LinkedIn, right? Like we all have goldfish attention spans or too much to do, a little bit.
For sure. Jeff said, hey, Jeff, by the way, we're excited to have you on the show in a few weeks. Jeff said, I'm a founder. I absolutely hate to be pandered to. It feels so disingenuous. To get my attention, start by actually personalizing your message. 99% of the stuff I get is clearly automated. I'll respond if it's personalized and relevant.
So we can get to this, right? Andy and I, will admit to having done some prep for this. One of the things that we wrote down that I can see highlighted on his page right now is that pseudo personalization is now the standard, right? Insert name at insert company.
Yeah.
Doesn't do anything for me, right? It's pandering, it's fluff, it's whatever, right? Again, definitely to Jeff's point and a little bit to answer Chelsea's question, right? Get to what you're doing for me, for my company, for making my life better, easier, right, more profitable. I don't know.
And I think it reiterates my point that Jeff brought up. I've never done the pandering thing before, and maybe I've never had it done to me. So I just delete it, because if it goes into that, I just delete it anyways. But and also to his point, he responds that people do the work, because I think that people want to understand that you are at least trying. It may not be correct. Like some of the stuff that we provide, the value is that we show job changes that may be relevant for their constituency of customers. We track their customers, right? So that's what we kind of show in some of our outreach. And so our response rate's 60%, and we get a fairly high. I can't remember what is the in terms of opportunities that are created off of that. It's really good.
It's above benchmark, definitively, right? And a lot of it is not just the opportunities that come from it are above whatever benchmark rate, but they're those thank you note emails, right? They're not just sure. They're wow, that was awesome. I don't normally respond to sales emails. Thank you so much. I just actually reached out to 3 of the people that you put on that list. We have like a fun little sheet of all of the good responses that we get each week that we kind of been keeping them. So I did write a couple of them down. I'll go ahead and read a few of them. I think they were fun. You definitely got my attention. I appreciate the fact you did your homework prior to reaching out. About 98% of your peers don't take the time to be prepared and do their calls as if it's a number game, which is basically what Jeff said. You are more thoughtful, which I appreciate, making examples of a real life situations, which is impressive. That was a $12 billion market cap VP of sales company.
Andy,
love it. Glad you've been able to get some insights and turn them into something. Let's have a chat.
So let me ask you really quick. Love that you shared those. Super awesome. I think anyone in sales development, it's getting an email like that just makes your entire life. I am curious. Obviously, don't share names or anything, but do you have an example of one of those emails that you've sent out recently that you got a good response like that back from? I think it would be cool to actually see an example. I know you guys aren't in your actual office today, so totally understand if that's not available.
Again, I think the examples are going to be specific to whatever it is you're selling.
Yeah.
So there isn't an example. So again, just the examples that I've used in the call today or on our conversation today have been, we detect job changes. So what type of job changes? One of the things that's really interesting that the byproduct of job changes is that you can track your customers. So if a customer moves onto a new company, they're 5 times more likely to buy at their new company. And given the fact that they, we just talked about how they spend 70% of their budget in their first 100 days. understanding that one of their customers just recently moved on and showing them literally the customers and the names of the people who just moved on for us gets these responses.
Gotcha.
Or in the case of when I was at HG, I would show very specific examples of what was happening across their portfolio companies and say, hey, this is really interesting. What's interested in your thoughts type of thing. And that would get a response to get the conversation going. So you're going to have to fill in, just like the SEO example, you're going to have to fill in some type of work, whatever it is that's a service or product that you sell, in that response after the first 2 or 3 sentences.
Yeah. But to make the example more concrete on how we do it at Live Data, right? The email that our AE sends out says something along the lines of your previous customers, right? And then it says, hey, we have seen that based on what we know about your company, these 10 people that were customers within your ICP that are specific to your buyer, right? So to take a CISO example, right? These 10 VP level or higher security employees left company X and just joined company Y, right? Or left company A and just joined company B. And, we list them out and we say, look, we're not telling you what to do with these. We're just guessing that you didn't know. And a little bit, we're also guessing until you tell us who your customers are. A little bit, we have to do some black magic and guess on the back end as to who was using CrowdStrike at their company to keep the security example, and who then moved into a company that maybe isn't using CrowdStrike or maybe now wants to reevaluate when a new CISO or CISO or VP level security employee joins, would be in a position to reevaluate sort of the tools, processes, products that they have in place. And I don't know about Andy, but I'll say that if anyone that's watching this wants to see it in action, tell us the company you work at, and we'll find that list of 10 plus people for you. I'm happy to go do that work.
Awesome. Okay, so I know that the answer to this is at least partly going to be job changes, but Ariaman, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. I'm really sorry if I'm not. Asked best way to identify your low-hanging fruits. Is there anything else that people can be looking at? Is there anything else that you guys track?
Yeah, I think, well, again, it depends on if you've identified your ICP and, figuring out who is your buyer within there, and then trying to then figure out, are they in market? Like, what's happening at that company? Go on LinkedIn. Are they in a growth mode? Are they losing a lot of folks where budgets are probably being frozen? I think those all tie into then identifying the accounts that you want to target. And then from there, you then start doing the work on who you want to reach out to. I mean, it's just back to basics. I think, we lived in a time of super cheap capital, and we just threw, bodies and calls and whatever would stick. But now we're kind of getting back to good fundamental basics of doing outreach and business, sales. And and these are the things that we should be doing all along. But in super high growth environments, it's tough.
Right. When tools and products make it easy to turn something into a numbers game, you turn it into a numbers game because you get results immediately, right? But I'm looking at the thing on the top of the screen now that says Outbound 2.0, right? And then our from mass outbound to personalized value add outreach. This is almost like from Outbound 2.0 back to Outbound 1.0.
Yeah.
How do you get back to the things that really matter to your customers? How do you really, and a lot of that is starting with, how do you really identify who your customers are, what they care about, right? It's sort of that definition of your audience and the research on the front end. Again, it sharpens the axe, right? It makes it easier to cut down the right trees or cut down trees more easily.
And the other thing too that I'm sure we're all aware of is the number of SaaS companies, or is this only SaaS? Is that, I can't remember if it.
No, I mean, people sell different things.
Right. So the number of software companies between now and 2030 is supposed to go from somewhere in the neighborhood of 180,000 to 1 million. So that means you're going to have 5 times many more competitors, give or take, over the next couple of years. Yeah. So you're going to have that many more people doing outreach to your same type of customers and trying to sell them whatever it is that you're selling. And so, yeah, I think if you take this more prescriptive approach, you'll be successful in the long run versus the numbers game.
And even if you go back to something Andy said earlier, you put yourself in your buyer's shoes. In that in the case where there's 5 times as many people selling, that means your inbox is going to have 25 times as many emails because everyone's going to do a 20-step drip campaign and hope that it works, right?
Yeah.
And the fastest thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out how to unsubscribe or block or whatever, all the things that are just noise, right? It's how do you right, to use more cliches. I'm the marketing guy. I love to talk in cliches, apparently. How do you get the signal through the noise, and how do you get that signal to the people who care about it the most?
And that's another thing too, is that your initial outreach should have a lot of work and effort put into it, because if you unsubscribe, that's it. You're technically, I think legally, not supposed to reach back out to them.
For us in California, subject to CCPA stuff, right? You get that one shot, right? Like you a little bit, it's binary. Like someone either wants to keep receiving emails, or they say no, thank you, never talk to me again. And so figuring out the right value prop, the right time, the right people to actually receive that message, all the rest, really makes it so that you really only have, the way we think about it at least, is that one shot, right?
So we do have a really good question for Mike, and I do want to get to it. But first, I do want to know just your perspective on like how outbound and how contacting prospects is going to evolve, because like you mentioned, like, okay, if we are receiving 25 times the amount of emails, of cold calls, people already don't like getting them. People are already finding ways, like gated, for example, to like calm down their inboxes, make them less crazy. Like, do you think that that is going to become more popular? Are other ways of reaching out, like communities like LinkedIn, going to become kind of the status quo versus like calling people's cell phones and emailing them directly? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I never pick up my cell phone. So, I mean, I just don't. I think when it comes to the emails, I just actually had my first gated email that I sent I think it was yesterday, maybe Monday, which was interesting. That was kind of a unique thing to be able to reach out to somebody and using that sort of technique. I think that it's hard. Everybody wants to kind of move this B2B selling into more B2C, like how do consumers buy? But man, I'll tell you what, it's making it really difficult. I mean, maybe it's because we're working with larger enterprise, but the compliance of everything, the length of the sales cycle of what I would think would be a much smaller, the compliance and everything that we have to do now is taking months and months and months to get through all the security questionnaire. Then you have the data questionnaire. Then you have, and I get it, like it's very important data, but like that's not a consumer. If I want to go on Amazon and buy something, I'm not going to make that seller fill out my questionnaire about all about where they source their product and is it organic cotton and where they, all those different types of things. So it's hard to, I think, draw those comparisons sometimes.
And again, it really gets to different mindsets and different platforms and different channels for all of these, for anything that you could possibly be selling, right?
Yeah.
My level of standard for the $96 pair of shoes that I'm buying, right, is like, all right, I read 2 reviews. They said they're comfortable, and I know that this brand fits my foot well, right? But if I'm trying to get, a $50,000 data vendor list, right, I'm probably going to want to do deeper due diligence simply because it's, whatever that is, 200 times the cost. So, I think a lot of it is, maybe, you go, maybe we are shifting away from, a lot of this, direct auto dial, cold call, cold email way of doing things, and into places where you can get, you sort of, there's more inherent trust, right? Instead of everyone being on the internet trying to build trust through ads, right? You go to the places that you already trust people, right? That's community, that's LinkedIn, that's your network, whatever it may be. And, I think, a lot of what the future of outbound is probably going to look like, is, you know, really relying on those sort of places where there's that innate trust baked in.
And I also think, just to kind of follow up on that, and I talked about earlier about sort of like the channel that I sort of grew up on, but now you look at all the ecosystems, like whether that be, you know, Snowflake or AWS, and there's so many products now that a user who's already in their ecosystem, who signed on to all of their security policies, within a couple clicks can then, you know, buy a product like that, which I think is sort of the consumer type experience that they want to be able to bring. And you see a lot more customers that are vendors, software vendors that are playing in the ecosystem. Then I think that that's a smart way of doing that. And then, of course, if I am selling a product, I want to know who uses that particular vendor, if it's Snowflake or if it's AWS or whoever. So I say, hey, just letting you know that we're actually in the things. You can, you know, within 2 clicks, be able to test out our service, and it's you know, easily you know, deployable, that type of thing. Again, we're not in that space, but I can see that that would be a huge value in how I would target or try to engage my prospects.
Gotcha.
The buzzwords like social proof, you know, and again, that trust thing, really, how do you get to places where that trust is already there, as opposed to having to try to build it from scratch, right? You know, this is right. Andy and I were joking about this, but you know, we all were raised on the idea of, you know, don't trust strangers on the internet, right? And I think a little bit we're still fighting that.
That's gone out the window now.
Yeah, right. You know, like everyone's trying to be the stranger on the internet that you trust.
Yeah, and also don't take food from strangers. And Uber Eats brings my food. Exactly. Don't get in cars with strangers. You get into
an Uber, right? You know, everything's changing a little bit, but you know, we're starting to try to figure out how to get back to, okay, you know, who do I trust? Who do I care to really make these decisions with?
For sure. Okay. Last question I think we can answer. I know we only have a couple minutes left, but Mike asked a really good one. How do you convince sales leaders who are used to quantity versus quality to invest in a process that values quality?
Show them why it matters. Yeah. I mean, a little bit, you know, this is right. You know, if you can reach out to 10 people and close 8 of them, as opposed to reaching out to 100 and close 5, you know, those are made up numbers, but you know, that's the proof as much as anything else.
I think, you know, if your organization, you know, is right now focused on the high volume and doing that, I think that is probably hard. I think if you could build a business case and take that to your sales leader and say, hey, I'd like to give this a go. I can't imagine a sales leader saying, hey, why don't you go ahead and try that? And that's give it, you know, 2 weeks, a month, whatever that you can get approved, and then look at the results. And the results really should be, and again, it all depends on what you sell, is, you know, how many open opportunities that led to a closed sale. Like, again, if you're just getting people on the phone to set a meeting and then you hand it off to the AE and it's, you know, bogus, you know, is that really helping that out? And I think there's also that the education that comes from spending the quality time for that seller. I think as a sales leader, I know that that's important to me as I you know, help train and bring sellers into, you know, AE positions from SDR positions, so that they have that business acumen and be able to talk to a business leader, like some of these founders that are kind of, you know, talking about here. Like, I hate to be pandered to, you know, all the things. I think that would ultimately be the way. I know I would be receptive to that. It probably depends on your organization, though.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you guys so much for being here today. Thank you to everyone who was watching. You guys sent in such good questions. It's been a super awesome conversation. If anyone who was watching maybe wants to reach out to you guys about live data, or just with questions about Outbound in general, where can they find you?
LinkedIn. Right. I think isn't that the answer for all of us? Yeah, no, I mean, I spend a lot of time on there. I know Andy does too. You know, that's for us, that's where our buyers are. That's where we spend our time, right? To go back to one of the points we made earlier. So
awesome. Jay said, just sent you a connection request, Andy. Awesome. Well, thank you guys again so much for being here. We will see you all next week. Jared Robin, our founder, will be hosting next week's episode. So super excited for that. But I will see you guys on LinkedIn, and I will see all of you guys in our other live stream. So
Awesome.
have an amazing
Thanks,
Friday
Adriana.
week.
Thanks, everyone.